The Muslims against the Hebrew Israelite. All this mess that started then is still going on now is because we are schizophrenic. Our minds are split, schizoid. We are not one self as we're supposed to be. You see, the unity, the commonality. You see, commonality, unity does not mean uniformity. Everybody doesn't look alike. In fact, a part of what makes the unity so deep is that everybody is bringing in a unique contribution to the unity. So you got different colors, you got different sizes, you got different movements, you got different rhythms, you got different tones, you got different levels, everything. And that's coming together and moving in a common direction makes that force a powerful and effective force, and that's the real source of our effectiveness as a community. But the idea is that if you bust that up and begin to make the elements fight against each other, then you lose the power of a united mind, a united African movement. You can't get people to move in a united way unless they understand their connectedness. And the fact that I have no self without the self of my children, without the self of my mother, without the self of my wife, without the self of those things that make up my family and my community. You are a part of me. I have no reality without you. So this idea of the social self is something that is the uniquely African contribution to the whole thing. So you have two dimensions now. And in the book, Know Thyself has a diagram of it. The lowest dimension is the dimension of the personal, physical self. Me, my, I. But that self is tiny compared to the social self, which makes all of us a self, a personality, a being that transcends our individuality. So we continue to live as long as the community lives. One of the things that we used to do, let me just give another example of this. You've heard of the extended family. The fact that this notion that Hillary Clinton stole from Africa about it takes a village to raise a child. She didn't steal it. She said where she got it from. But white folks started quoting her as if she made up this proverb. But this idea of it takes a village to raise a child is this recognition that as a community, we always understood it ain't your children. You don't have children by yourself. Your children are my children. The children belong to me. The women of our communities, they are our women. Not in their physical individuality, but the extent to which they need the support, the companionship, and the maxed energy of a male energy force. I am that male, they are my women. Simultaneously, I am their man. Not in a simple, physical, carnal way, but we constitute a connectedness. And that's why when they busted up our families, they thought they messed us up, but we continue to grow and thrive and build and raise children and support each other and raise our children with an understanding of who they were, even on the plantations, because they had busted up the individual nuclear family, but they couldn't bust up the village and the community that held us all together. And that's the power of this thing. We got in trouble when we started imitating white folks. When we decided we wanted to be just like Father Knows Best. We wanted to have us a nuclear family. Don't you put your hand on my child. What you mean, your child? This child has a need. This is our child. This child is in trouble. This is our child. This child has the need to be educated. This is our child. And as long as we thought that way, we were all right. But when it became mine, and when you begin to pull back into these little insulated enclaves locked up in your apartment with your own biological kin, then you started developing some real problems. Because when we were a community, there was no such thing as father absence. Because as long as there was a man anywhere, there was a father around somewhere. As long as there was. No such thing as orphans. Children were always absorbed back into the community because even if mama and biological daddy died, somebody had a love for those children, would bring those children in, and they'd be a part of the community. But then we came along with all these laws about separate orphanages and who's going to get the adoption rights and who will go into foster care and who has the biological right to be responsible for this and who has the sole responsibility for the child and how do you begin to preserve the individual rights of that child's responsibility and who has all that old crap, which is European isolationism, was the source of our difficulty. And when we started imitating that, thinking we were healthy buppies and bourgeoisie, then we began to lose contact with the power we had as a community. That's number two. Number three, in terms of the third dimension, you see, I'm expanding this concept of the self. And it's growing bigger and bigger, and we wanted you to understand that all of it's you. All of it's you. Because you as an individual, you as the social piece, and then thirdly, you as a part of the tribal self. What is the tribal self? The tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social group. The family, the people you know who live next door, your neighbors, the people who are members of UAM, people whose faces you know, that constitute the collective community as you know it in that sense. That's a broader sense, but when we start talking about the tribal self, I'm talking about those living, those yet unborn, and those who are the ancestors. So the connection with the ancestors is tied into the tribal self. What does that mean? That means that the tribal self constantly reminds us that we don't have the right to claim independence of the history of which we are a part. So don't nobody care that you individually weren't a slave in South Carolina. The tribe was enslaved. So therefore, you were enslaved. You understand? You don't have the right to say, well, I came from Barbados, and in Barbados we didn't work on the plantations, and we were in Bermuda, we want to do it in Bermuda, and I'm somehow different. I've got my own. You were a slave because the tribe was enslaved in Haiti, in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in Bermuda, in Bahia, in Central America, in Guyana. Every place on this planet, you Africans were enslaved. So a part of the tribal self is this trauma of the plantation. You don't walk around pretending you weren't there. Well, individually, none of us were there. But had we not been there, we would not be here. You see, because we were there, we therefore can be here. We have to remember this because this is our empowerment. You see, when they broke our connection with the ancestors, we lost the understanding that they are always with us. You see, Africans have no concept of death in the simple carnal sense of Europeans. And it doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Muslim or whatever. The idea is that in the African philosophy of life, you continue to live in the community, whether you are in flesh or have been able to transcend the flesh. Africans understand you are a part of the community before you get here, while you're here, and when you leave, because you don't ever leave the community. We are still doing the work of Imhotep. We are still a part of the tradition of the tribe of Ramesses. We are still involved in the great work of Obatashaka. We are still, of Shaka Zulu. We are still involved in the mighty work of those people who struggle here. We are still a part of the work of Harriet Tubman and of Denmark Vesey, or Frederick Douglass, and all the rest of those who gave so much. But you see, they wanted to make us believe that we were in violation of our concept of monotheism by appreciating that Africans continue to be a part of the community. Libation was a ritual of memory. It's a way to invoke consciousness. You see, when you remember the ancestors, you actually reinvent them, you recreate them, you bring them back into this place, into this time, and the energies and the power that they had is brought back into this moment. You know, this isn't strange now. Listen, even Europeans now claim that the power of resistance to many diseases and resistance to many problems is because those diseases were defeated by the ancestors. They call it genetic immunity. They talk about how previous generations have already conquered certain diseases, so that immunity is passed on from one generation to the next. And of course, since these people are so physical that they can't see with the other eye, they only look for physical explanations. They're looking for genes and DNA and some kind of biochemical. But the bottom line is that we are spiritually containing everything that has gone before. We are it. The only thing that's not here is what didn't make it. But everything that survived is here in us. That's why we represent the accumulation of the greatest possibilities of human life on this planet. The fact that slavery kicked our butt, but we survived it. Therefore, we've come out of it with greater power than anybody else on this earth. We got. We are a tribe. Now you say, well, like, what about those of us who mix? I got some Iroquois in me, I got some Blackfoot and some Creek in me. In fact, my great-great-granddad was a Scotsman, and I got some Irish in me too. Well, that's your problem. You understand? Those ancestors are being remembered in the culture. The European culture is constantly remembering their ancestors. Why do you think you got a pocket full of dead white presidents? That's European ancestral worship. Why do you think they've got all these white folks' pictures in every courthouse and all the universities and the corporate headquarters? You come in there, big dead white folks all over the wall. And they are always being reminded that the ancestors are here. And then you start getting strange and peculiar. Well, I don't do this ancestor thing. I don't worship my ancestors. Well, you're the only one. You see, that's why you are so weak. Because you've lost connection with the angels. You've lost connection with the jinns. You've lost connection with the spiritual entities that were sent as intermediaries to do the work of the divine creator who used human beings to serve as the vessel for making things happen. When you lose memory, then you don't know, not only can you slam dunk a basketball, you can slam dunk the planet through the circle of time. You don't realize that the same healing power that Imhotep have, we still have. You don't realize that the mathematical and architectural minds that built the pyramids based on a spiritual blueprint are still operating with us. You don't realize that the powerlessness of our enemies who attacked our bodies but didn't bother to somehow destroy our minds, their power continues only as long as we give them the power over our bodies and abdicate the power of our minds. We don't understand who we are because we have forgotten. We have forgotten the tribal self. Now, you see, the work of Brother Rashidi and Van Sertima and Chancellor Williams and the great elder who's now an ancestor, John Henry Clark, and all of these brilliant scholars, why is their work so important? They have been engaged in reviving the memory of the ancestors. That's what history is. You see, history in and of itself, as a chronicle of events, as dates and locations, is not significant. It is significant only if you know the connection between those events and you. That's why the slave makers erased the consciousness of the African contributors to the building of this civilization. That's why they did that. They didn't want you to know that you helped lay the foundation for civilized life. They didn't want you to know that the concept of family was generated by African people. They didn't want you to know that the concept of the relationship to the creator of the universe and the understanding that the human being is made of immortal substance that cannot be destroyed, that transcends time and space. They didn't want you to know that that concept was first formulated by African people. They didn't want you to know that long before Osiris resurrected from the dead, long before Jesus resurrected from the dead, Osiris or Osir had already gotten up from the dead and was able to be the ruler over the heavens and earth. They don't want you to know that the woman called Mary was in fact a replication of the woman called Osset or called Isis, who was able to bring forth a virgin child out of the relationship between the divine spiritual being of who she was, and to reconstitute life and start it again by her own search, perseverance, and higher power. They don't want you to understand that those are African concepts. They don't want you to know that the whole planet is an African colony. They don't want you to know the role that we play. The reason that they don't want you to know that is because by not knowing that, you lose your connection with the ancestors. And what happens? They keep theirs, so they tell you about Columbus. What are their ancestors? Tell you about Washington, the father of the country. What are their ancestors? Shakespeare, ancestors. Mozart, ancestor. Chopin, ancestor. All their ancestors, they're always talking about their ancestors. But they don't tell you about your ancestors. And that's the power, the effectiveness, the brilliance, and the importance of us understanding who our ancestors are. You see, it is the reconstruction of the African self. Once we can connect again, then we have gotten our whole tribal self back together again. We have reconnected with the higher dimension of who we are. And once we gain that, we are in fact equipped to engage in doing those things that have already been accomplished and to understand our power to do whatever we need to do. You see, the only reason that, as Chairman Maddox was saying, the only reason that we continue to beg white folks is because we don't believe we can do it. We don't know the tribal connection. We talk about the pyramids. We talk about Imhotep. We talk about Ramesses. We talk about Shaka Zulu. We talk about Nzinga. We talk about these things. But we don't really believe we can do it. Because if we believed we could do it, that would reconnect us with the power of that tribal self that would equip us to do whatever we need to do. We really and truly believe that we can only do second-rate stuff. We are into a storefront, mom-and-pop reality. You don't want to rule the world anymore, because a part of what they did by wiping out our memory was to make us believe we could not run the world. You don't want to publish books again. You don't want to start universities again. You're still trying to get a preschool started. We gave the world the concept of universities, and here you are trying to get a grant to start a preschool. Why don't you pull together the power of your ancestral self, your social self, and your personal assets, and go on and put together whatever you need to do? But you see, this is a psychological problem. Let me tell you. Do you know that no one could stop us today if we started our own university? Do you know if we decided to start certifying ourselves to do what we needed to do, don't you know that nobody could stop us? Don't you know that if we mastered what we needed to master in knowing ourselves, there would be nothing that could be done to stop us? Now, I know it's hard for you to believe that, because we get so overwhelmed by the surface, by the tangible, and not understanding the integrity, the power, the indivisibility, and the strength that rests in the social self and in the tribal self. So I want to suggest to you that the power of self-knowledge is reconnecting with those things. Not reconnecting with them as things that happened, but reconnecting them as things that are happening. Understanding that these were not just predecessors, these are participants. You see, the African concept of connection with the ancestors understands that they are still here, working through us, working with us. No, you can't see them. No, they aren't going to send you a letter. No, they aren't going to call you on your cell phone. No, they don't have a beeper. But they are clearly here. And that is the power that we've got to begin to tap and understand as a community. Now, the last part of this self. You see, we're talking about the self as a multi-dimensional reality. The self as a multi-dimensional reality. Think with me now. Try to feel that. Try to feel that you are not separate from me at the level of social, at the level of a tribal self. Try to feel with me how George Washington Carver is still a part of you. How Paul Robeson is still a part of you. How Harriet Tubman is still a part of you. Try to grasp that concept. And once you do, you begin to find the incredible power that you have, because it makes us able to do whatever we need to do. The last dimension is the dimension that was most important. And it is the one that Africans constantly remind ourselves of within the confines of our culture. And that is the simple idea that God is in us. That God is in us. Akbar, what you talking about? How is that big? Well, it's a simple thing. We are emanations from a divine created source. We are, when I say emanations, that means in the same way that every piece of energy on this planet is an emanation from the energy of the sun. We are emanations from the power of the Creator. Now we know that Genesis in the Quran talks about it, about Adam being made in the image of God. That's cool. That's a nice metaphor. But what it is really saying is that God continues to exist in each and every one of us. We are carriers of the energy of God. We are spirit in our essence. We are fundamentally spiritual entities encapsulated in flesh. This is our space suit. The space suit that we have to wear for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years, whatever period of time. It's just a spaceship, a space suit. We have to breathe on this atmosphere, so we need nostrils and lungs. We have to have nourishment to be able to digest the food from this planet, so we have stomachs and intestines and livers and stuff. We have to be mobile with gravity, so we have a body that is able to respond to gravity and move on the earth by being able to be transported by that. We have eyes that permits us to be able to visually contact the environment of which we are part, where we can break down the light configurations and translate them into certain kinds of forms and images that gives us the whole concept of vision. We have a vibratory system inside our spaceship that lets us, a spacesuit that permits us to hear the vibrations called sound and be able to put them together in certain kinds of patterns to let us begin to understand the whole process of what sound and audition is all about. These are characteristics of the spacesuit. But we are simply using the spacesuit as spirits, as spiritual entities on this planet. Now, two things about this. Africans never forgot that. I don't care if they were Muslims, whether they were Yoruba, whether they were traditional African religious practitioners, whether they were Christians, whether they were Jehovah's Witness, whether they were Catholic, didn't matter. A part of the African culture kept alive the notion that we are spirit. So no child was born unless that child had four experiences. The child was recognized as an individual entity. So it had a name. But it wasn't given a name until the whole community came together. And they had a naming ritual. And in the naming ritual, the child went from arm to arm, and every adult in the community claimed parenthood. You became Baba. You became Mama. Every adult in the community became part parent. So the child was taught, even at the time of 8 days old, you don't belong to just a mother, just a father. You belong to the community. Then that same child was given a name. And the name not only identified them separately, it connected them with the ancestors. So the idea is, what ancestor has sent you? What ancestor is present in you? And you are a direct connection with an ancestor that constitutes this community, that has found a new expression in you. So every name reminded that child that child was in fact connected with an ancestral continuity. And then the other piece of the naming ceremony was to remind that child was a gift from God, that it was a spirit, that it had only come temporarily again. It would be here for a while, and it would in fact leave, and it would continue to come because it was spirit. So that understanding was a key piece. So the idea that the same thing happened when you were initiated into adulthood. Boys became men by being reminded that their responsibility was not to be able to be the studs of the community that now be sperm donors and therefore drop seeds and go on and leave them, but they were to become the fathers that were in fact the continuation of a certain spiritual entity that was both tribal as well as social, that they somehow could understand how they carried on that responsibility and didn't confuse what their penises were able to do with what their spirits were supposed to do. How women did not define their womanhood by being able to get pregnant and be able to take their baby, talk about that's my baby's daddy there, and be able to push their baby around the mall, but they understood the responsibility of motherhood as being a divinely inspired possibility to be able to bring life through you as a vessel, understanding that you were a reflection of the life that was held in you, and you were able to replicate that process by bringing life out of your body, which was actually the living spirit of life that was placed in you. That was the power of understanding motherhood. But Africans taught that. They didn't leave that to chance. They didn't let no gang teach you how to become a man. They didn't let no gang teach you how to become a woman. The elders, those people who knew well and knew long, took you aside and said, come here, gal. Come here, boy. Sit down. Let me show you what a man is supposed to know. Let me teach you. Let me give you tests. Let me make you demonstrate that you're ready to call yourself a man. And if you still want to act like a boy, you ain't welcome in this community. You got to grow some more. And I don't care how big you are, how fat you are, how cute you think you are. You ain't nothing till you become a spiritual man, a tribal man. You are nothing until you become a spiritual woman. A spiritual woman, a tribal woman, a social woman. And these are the lessons that went on. So Africans constantly within the culture were teaching what needed to be taught in order to bring and maintain this awareness of the multidimensionality of self. Now let me tell you something that happened. It was not accidental that Europeans made a distinction between white people and black people, and made it very clear that we were not made of the same material. They made that very clear, and they enforced that and made sure that we understood that whatever they were, we weren't. And then they put their face on God. God had to pass his wife to get in America. And you see, this was not accidental. They knew exactly what they were doing. They got him a white woman and say, you the mother of God. They got a little white baby and say, you are God as a baby. They got him a white man and put him on the cross, you dead God. Got him a resurrected God, say, you resurrected God. And then they have you, hail God, full of grace, hail Mary, full of grace, love you Jesus, white man, white man, white man, white man, white man. And what they were doing, and it's happening all over Harlem, every Sunday, every night, all over Atlanta, all over New Orleans. They're still yelling out and screaming, calling on this white man, white man, white man, white man. And if somebody stands up to you and says, you are God, You are convinced they're crazy. You're convinced they're crazy because you can't imagine the relationship of God to yourself. I want to suggest to you, my brothers and sisters, that the most powerful knowledge of ourselves that was taken away from us was the recognition that God is in each and every one of us. Not just the 5%ers, but the 100%ers. Not just the Muslims, not just the Hebrew Israelites, not just the Jehovah's Witnesses, not just those who've been born and washed again, and you are now whiter than snow and going to walk around heaven all day long. But God is in every one of us, even the junkies, even the crack users, even the AIDS patients. God is in all of us. And one of the worst things that happen is for us to lose consciousness of spirit as being the foundation of who we are. Now, what I'm giving you is not a religion lesson. This is a psychology lesson. This is understanding how the psyche of the Saku, because you see, Saku was an African concept. Read Life from Ancient Africa, one of my other books. Saku is an African concept that came from the people of Kemet. And Saku was the concept of soul or spirit representing the identity of the human being. The Greeks came and grabbed Saku, twisted it, called it Psyche, made it a little white angel flying around with wings on, and put it into their later conception of the human personality that they call the study of the psyche. But it wasn't that psychology, logos of the soul, or logos of the psyche. But they really had taken the word Saku. Go read Gerald Massey, the Book of the Beginnings. He gives a linguistic origin of these words and shows you that the word psychology is actually an African derivative of the word Saku, which was the concept of spirit. But they have taken psychology and reduced it to behavior. They believe that all you are is how you look. They've reduced the human makeup to some brain work, some hormones, and what your behavior happens to be on any given day. They took away the idea that you are God walking on the planet in the flesh of a human being that gives you the power to do what God can do working through you. And the idea of putting their white face on God was to erase the memory, to wipe away the consciousness of the highest dimension of who you were. Brothers and sisters, I'm through.
Brothers and sisters, Dr. Naeem Akbar. I said, Dr. Naeem Akbar breaks it down time and time again. Once again, brothers and sisters, Dr. Naeem Akbar.